Thank you to everyone that's joining us today. We know you have busy schedules, and then hopefully you'll find the next 40 to 45 minutes beneficial to your organization and what you're going to hear from our panel today. By way of introduction, my name is Tim McCudden. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer at Helios. I'll be your host today. Some housekeeping items. You'll have a Q&A button on your upper right-hand side. If you have questions as we go through, please submit those. I'll be accumulating those questions for a Q&A session at the end. Today, what you're going to witness is you're going to hear from Land O'Lakes, who reached a very pivotal moment in their journey with Workday. After years of using ADP's eTime, they made a decision to move towards Workday's time tracking feature. It not only reflected a shift in technology, but a broader vision of how their work and their future work is at Land O'Lakes. You're going to hear about the path to that decision. Through their analysis, it became very, very clear to them that the cost of staying on eTime extended beyond just the dollars that they were spending. So with Workday already established in other parts of the business, expanding into the time tracking portion of Workday became both a logical and an efficient way to do business at Land O'Lakes. You're going to hear about the project team, how they made updates to their stakeholders, had a little fun with the project. And in the end, Land O'Lakes didn't just implement a new time tracking system. They delivered a change in how they respected people's time. They improved their experience and reaffirmed the company's commitment to the progress at Land O'Lakes. So with that said, the close to 300 people that are on the line today, get ready to hear the experience of Land O'Lakes. And with a summary that I just gave you, I'm going to turn it over to John, Sarah Beth, and Nick to share some introductions and their Workday time tracking journey. So John, Sarah Beth, and Nick, the stage is all yours.
Good deal. So I can kick everything off. So welcome, everybody. We're very excited to share our experience with moving to Workday Time with everybody. My name's John Gardner. I'm the Director of Employee Services here at Land O'Lakes. So I have responsibility to lead our payroll teams and our HR Solutions Center team, which is our inbound HR call center.
Yes, and hello. My name is Sarah Beth Bosselman. Also with Land O'Lakes, I'm part of our HR portfolio and project management team. And I was the project manager for this effort when we implemented Workday Time. So excited to talk about it.
I wonder, did we lose Nick?
Might have.
You're on mute. There you go.
Oh, there you go.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, hi, everybody. I'm Nick Stevens, co-founder of Helios Consulting. I lead the consulting practice here, and I had the opportunity to work with John very early on in the planning stages of this project, all the way through to the end with his team. So very excited to talk about it. So the agenda today, we went through our introductions. We're going to tell you a little bit more about Land O'Lakes and Helios. Then we'll move on to the pre-implementation phase of the project, on to the implementation, through to go live. And then we're going to try to save some time at the end for some questions and answers.
All right, so I can give everybody a little bit of overview of Land O'Lakes. I personally find kind of these overview slides pretty helpful to kind of understand where my company sits size-wise and complexity-wise compared to whoever's speaking. So Land O'Lakes is a cooperative, so we are member-owned, so we're not publicly traded, anything like that. We have 4 separate lines of businesses, and those aren't on here, but everybody knows Land O'Lakes for our tasty butter and our dairy products. So everybody knows Land O'Lakes is the dairy company, but we are more than just the butter company. So we have our dairy facilities. We also have Purina Animal Nutrition. We own Winfield, which is our crop protection, crop seeds, crop nutrients portfolio. And then we also have a subsidiary called Truterra, which deals in sustainability and responsible farming practices, things like that. So we do have nearly 300 locations between all 4 lines of businesses throughout the country. We have product in all 50 states. And we are in multiple countries as well. But for the sake of this, we did roll out time tracking to US only. So that's going to be the focus of our group here.
And John, one more fact that I think is pertinent to this conversation: how many unions?
Yes, we have anywhere, I can't remember the exact count. That's a good point. We have around 12 to 15 unions currently here at Land O'Lakes. So that does add some complexity that we'll talk about a little bit later in the slide deck. So those unions are very, very unique, as they are at most companies, and how they want to structure their pay programs and things like that. And we'll talk a little bit about more later.
Thanks, John. It's just a little bit about Helios. We are a services partner of Workday. So we run the gamut from initial deployments to post-deployment optimization. We can do enhancements and expansion. So if you are already a Workday customer, you're looking to move to time tracking, we'd love to be your deployment partner. We also spend a lot of time in M&A support, helping with mergers and acquisitions, getting those groups into Workday or out of Workday. We support annual cycles, so compensation, annual merit, bonus, performance. We have support for that. And we also have a program called Horizons. So that's our apprenticeship program. And if you wanted to learn more about that, you can definitely reach out to Tim after this. Why would you choose Helios? I like to say that we're a small partner that does work for very large, complex organizations, global projects, complex time tracking projects like this Land O'Lakes project. We have deep expertise, but because we're a little bit smaller, we're very flexible and we're very client centric. So we think of ourselves as customer side consulting. A lot of our consultants come from Workday customers and moved into consulting later. So a lot of experience understanding, what you go through on a daily basis and what you need to take these systems and take something like time tracking and own it yourself after we leave. So we focus a lot on knowledge transfer, internal growth, making sure we can leave and you're confident that you can maintain that system after we go. And we have a lot of proven results. So we work with a lot of Fortune 500 companies, Fortune 1000 companies, a lot of complex global projects, and we're very proud of our success rate. So we're going to jump into the project overview now, and we're going to start. With what the system was before Land O'Lakes moved to Workday Time Tracking.
Yeah, so I can talk to this. So this was still during my time here at Land O'Lakes. So before Workday Time, we were using ADP eTime, which is Chrono software just rebranded with an ADP logo on it. So if you've used like some of that old legacy Chrono software, it's the exact same software that ADP eTime was. So we started rolling that out back in 2012. It took us around 7 years to fully roll that out to all of our 300 locations. So we replaced that, and we'll talk about the timeline here in a little bit. We replaced ADP eTime in 10 months. So it was a very rapid deployment. So taking what took us 7 years initially to roll that out and replace it all within 10 months was a pretty good success story in and of itself. But we needed to make the business case, and we'll talk a little bit about that on the next slide, but we needed to make the business case of why we wanted to move from eTime to a different vendor, which happened to be Workday. So we had numerous service issues with ADP. That was our only product on ADP. And because of that, we didn't get the love that I felt that we should. I'm not going to sit here and bash ADP, but we did have quite a few service issues just because we weren't a huge priority for them. There were some things that took a long time to do. If we ever needed to make any sort of enhancements, we needed to go to ADP to do that. We couldn't do that ourselves. And they have blackout periods toward the end of the year, beginning of the year, because they're a large payroll company. They need to focus on getting W-2s created, tax filings. So we had to work around those blackout periods. Those weren't always, the most ideal situation because it caused enhancements that we wanted to put in place to be delayed sometimes by around 6 months. So that was one of them. Nick had mentioned that we do have unions. One of our unions in particular is unbelievably complex in how it calculates vacation rates when employees take time off. ADP's system could not handle that, so we had to outsource that to another system, which became a bolt-on to the ADP system. So we now had 2 vendors to manage within that space. The clocks that we were using were old and outdated. So we were told if we wanted to keep using those clocks that we would have to get those on eBay, which wasn't the most desirable outcome. But we did have, when we were really doing our due diligence and looking at this, we had a call with Gartner, which is a big consulting firm. They let us know in advance of ADP letting us know that this whole system was going to be sunset in 2027. So we were going to need to make a move regardless at some point in the very near future. So that helped precipitate that business case that we need to move, and we need to move quickly.
And just to follow up on that, if you are in that situation where you're on a Kronos that is hitting end of life and you're reevaluating, that's very common for us to encounter this. So, working with John very early on, we were very confident that we could meet their goals, their timelines, and what they needed out of the system. We convert from Kronos all the time. We convert from ADP eTime all the time. Others that come up, SAP, Oracle, PeopleSoft, we've seen it all, but really lately there's been a high demand to move from Kronos and ADP eTime into Workday Time Tracking, and we're very confident that we can make that happen.
All right, so this leads into the business case and how we decided to do that. In the business case, there are quite a few different things that you'll want to consider that. Because we needed, all of those time clocks were proprietary to ADP. So if we moved away from ADP, we were going to need to replace all of our time clocks. So that was a hardware expense that we needed to make sure to include in our budget for the project. The implementation partner, so Helios, much to my chagrin, didn't do this for free, so they need to make money as well. So there's a cost for the implementation partner. There are the Workday SaaS fees for the actual Workday Time project themselves. There are SaaS fees for our time clock vendor that we chose as well. But there are some things that you may need, you may not need, but you want to include those in the budget as well. So at Land O'Lakes, we report into HR, my team does, but it's a requirement for our projects that are these big, broad scope projects that have IT implications, that we need to have an IT project manager on as well, that was partnering with Sarah Beth. That's a billable expense at Land O'Lakes, so we need to account for that. You may or may not need to do that, but that's something that we needed to do. We needed to budget in case we needed additional Workday tenants. Those don't come free either. We have change management resources. I budgeted because I didn't know how much time this would take from my team and payroll. I budgeted for additional resources for temporary backfill for that team so they could be dedicated to the project. We didn't end up using that resource, which is great. So we were able to come in under budget. But there's also a cost of doing nothing, and that's an overlooked cost, in my opinion. A lot of times you're still going to have the SaaS fees from our old vendor, ADP. But we also needed to do some fixing of some of our configurations that needed to be fixed, regardless if we stayed on ADP or if we moved to Workday Time. So that was going to be around $150,000 to have a consultant come in, correct some of the configurations because they were mainly due to our California location. Unbelievably complex. That's where that union is that had the complex calculations. It was causing manual effort, and we wanted to reduce that risk where employees could be paid wrong. That was going to cost money to do that. We had what we called historical edits in ADP, where if a manager gave a retroactive pay increase and didn't enter that timely, managers would screw that up all the time. It was unnecessarily complicated. So we wanted to address that as well. So those are some of the costs, but then we talk about some of the benefits. Having everything in one system is just glorious. I love it. It's just great to have everything in one system. We used ADP eTime for our hourly employees, but we use Workday for time off and things like that for our salaried employees. So managers, if you manage both hourly and salaried employees, would have to go into two systems to do similar tasks. And it was just cumbersome. And it makes it so much easier that everything's now in one system. So we wanted to make sure that the employee experience and the manager experience was better. So we had baked into the business case, we were going to save managers time by having everything in one system. They were already familiar with Workday, so it wasn't a big lift on their part. The reporting is phenomenal out of Workday. We can get real-time reporting on how much employees are working, things like that. So there are huge benefits to having everything in one system. Those unions, again, we removed that unnecessary bolt-on that we had with that complex union because Helios was able to take everything and program that directly into Workday. So we did have quite a few benefits that we realized out of going live that, again, we'll talk about some of these in a little bit, but we baked that into the business case that not only are we going to shift some of the costs, and here are the costs for the project, but here are the benefits that the company is going to receive once we go live.
And just to call out, John and his team were great at thinking about what they needed from an outcome perspective. So when we talk about the fees and Workday Time Tracking SaaS fees, the licensing, yes, that's what Land O'Lakes needed to add the additional license. We talk about this as a time tracking project. However, if we went into the technical details, there were components that were related to time tracking. There were components that were related to payroll, right? So there's quite a bit of payroll configuration to fix those union groups. There was some absence management, some core HR. And we love that when we're working with customers who are thinking about those outcomes and not necessarily thinking with their blinders on from a particular module perspective, right? And so I think that's really important when we're tackling these projects from a business case perspective, talking about those outcomes and making sure that your partners are also aware of those pieces so that they're planning for it accordingly.
All right. So as we were doing this work and preparing for this work, we really tried to ground ourselves in some core priorities as we were starting up. And then we referred back to these frequently throughout the entirety of the project as we were designing and making decisions along the way. So the first couple, pay accuracy is obviously huge, along with compliance. You have to get those right. Easier said than done, but you have to hit those two. But I want to talk a little bit more about some of the others. So we also held ourselves to building with the future in mind. We all know things can change, whether it's legislature, unions, you name it. Things can change quickly. So how can we build with just a little bit more flexibility in mind, or change our ways a bit, set ourselves up a bit better to meet those needs as they arise? Along with that, we wanted employees, managers, timekeepers, anyone using this in any way to have a good experience. So not cumbersome, not confusing, in a way that's meeting their needs, on a medium or mode that's meeting their needs. So when we incorporated folks from our locations or the field into our design team as we were working on this, we focused a lot on that, and we came back to this goal in particular to kind of guide that decision making. We also decided it was really important to automate wherever possible and reduce as much manual work as we could. We were later able to get some great stats on this and made some strides for some of our timekeepers, which we can reference in a bit, but definitely we're able to make progress there on the manual work side. And then these last couple here were critical to building our business case, and a big reason to do a project like this. So leaders had been asking for more visibility into labor costs and insights, and by implementing Workday Time and then kind of looking at data after the fact, we were able to make a lot of improvements there as well.
Great. Now we're going to move into the pre-implementation phase.
So one of the things that Nick and I talked about before Helios was even officially engaged was the big necessity of having standardization as part of this project. And so I actually met Nick at a user group meeting, a Workday payroll user group meeting, probably 2016-ish, 2017. Well, it might have been a little bit later than that. But he had presented on how they did some time tracking work for some other companies here in the Twin Cities. And I don't know if anybody remembers when speed walking was an Olympic event, but after that event happened, I probably could have won gold in that Olympics if that was still the case, because I made a beeline right up to Nick. I don't even know if you remember this, Nick, but I pretty much accosted you with about 50,000 questions. And so that's how we made our introduction on that. But you really drilled into my head. Standardization is going to be the key for success of this project. And prior to, while we were still on E-Time, it was kind of the Wild West. All of our locations were paying employees differently. We had different shift differentials, and we had weird amounts of shift differentials, like 12 cents. It's like, so we did a lot of work, which we labeled as phase 0, to really analyze all of our current pay practices, see where we could standardize. And this is while we were still on ADP E-Time. So the first thing we did was we identified who the stakeholders are and who the decision makers are going to be to help us drive this standardization. We didn't want to do a lift and shift from our current configuration to Workday Time. That's not going to get us where we needed to be. All that's going to do is continue the Wild West mentality. It's going to be a nightmare to administer. It's not going to be scalable. So we wanted the people at the right level that were able to make these decisions so that we had, plenty of backbone to make the decisions, make the configuration changes in advance of the Workday Time program. So those key stakeholders were what we refer to internally as our DOMs. They are our director of manufacturers or manufacturing. So all of our plant managers for our 300 plants roll up to a DOM. And so those DOMs have a lot of decision-making power for how those plants operate. And they were 100% on board. They realized this is not sustainable, having every site do their own thing. So we standardize our shift configuration, our shift differentials for those. We standardize what the shifts were across the organization as well. So when it came time for Helios to come in, again, Nick drilled into my mind, not only is it a good business practice, it's going to be cheaper for you guys when we come in to do the implementation because we have less builds that we need to do. And we'll talk about some of that a little bit more as well. But we documented every single one of our locations and how they were paying their employees. So some of their employees, when they work across midnight, we bucketed the hours to the day they punch in. Some of them were from the day they punch out. Some of them were a strict midnight to midnight. So we documented all that, consolidated that as much as we can. We weren't able to do everything. That's just the nature of the beast, but we were able to standardize as much as we can, and that made the project that much easier and that much more of a success at the end.
And just to emphasize that avoiding a lift and shift mentality, especially when we're coming out of ADP E-Time or Kronos, I cannot emphasize that enough, that you will not have good outcomes if you try to lift and shift Kronos into Workday. Workday Time Tracking can accomplish the vast majority of outcomes that you need, but it's going to function a little bit differently, and it's going to look and feel different. And there's really no way to avoid that. And we don't think you should avoid that. We actually think there's many, many benefits to making sure that you're using what's the off-the-shelf functionality and all the things that we can also configure and customized for Workday Time Tracking. But anytime we run into those things, it's really, really important to avoid that. And you want to focus on those outcomes. Standardizing and simplifying, John and his team did an amazing job. We still were left with all those unions, and those are collective bargaining agreements. We can't change those. So there's still a lot of complexity there and a lot of things we needed to work through. But at least where we could, where there weren't unions and collective bargaining agreements, they did an amazing job of harmonizing and standardizing, like he mentioned, to be able to move faster and actually deliver quicker and cheaper.
Yeah, so then it came time for the RFP process. So we had two separate RFPs, one for the time clock vendors, one for the implementation partner. So we looked at 3 vendors for time clocks. So we had already had demos. We scheduled demos with all 3 of those. We had reference calls. We did a lot of due diligence because we only get one shot to get this correct. We want to make sure we aren't planning on changing this anytime soon. So whatever decision we make, we need to be willing to live with that for quite a while. So we did a lot of due diligence. We, when the RFPs came back in, we wanted all of those vendors to put together, what's your pricing going to be? What's the timeline that you anticipate for this project? What kind of support are you going to have after we go live and during the project as well? How are you going to help us along the way to achieve success? So there are 2 components to those vendors, 3 really. There was an implementation charge on all of them, but the hardware costs for those 3 vendors that we looked at differed widely, as did the ongoing SaaS fees. So we ended up choosing Dormakaba, which is, that's the time clock vendor that we chose. Could not be happier with our decision. They were not the cheapest on the hardware. They were not the cheapest on the SaaS. They were kind of right in the middle. But, there was one vendor that was cheap on the hardware, but expensive on the SaaS piece. So you need to take all of that into account when you're looking at things. From an implementation partner, same sort of thing, but I also look on here for kind of soft things as well. So similar things. We looked at 4 different vendors. You need to make sure that, at least on my part, this is kind of that soft stuff. I want to be able to get along with the vendor. I kind of call it the beer test that, hey, if I want to go out and have a beer after work, I would like to include, the implementation partner and not feel like it's just a chore, because I want to get along with them. We're going to be working very, very closely for a long time. I want to make sure that we are in sync with each other. So that was kind of a soft thing that's not included in here, but we had a ton of reference calls as well. The same sort of thing, pricing, timeline, support structure. We got very, very different results on the RFPs from those vendors. Some of them just seemed to kind of mail it in. Some of them, had, like Helios did a very difficult or very comprehensive job of getting everything that we need and checking the box. But again, Helios isn't the most expensive. They definitely weren't the cheapest route either. So I'm a very firm believer, you get what you pay for. So if you go for the very cheapest option, you're likely going to have issues with that. Nick and I had multiple rounds of calls. There were a couple other vendors that we had multiple rounds for. There was one that we just had one call, and that was it. And it was like a 30-minute call. So, but Nick and his team were very good at doing a deep dive into figuring out exactly what we needed, all of the different pay practices that we had. They did a very good job of understanding our company and our complexity so that they could put an accurate bid together. So that's obviously we went with Helios because they're here today with us, had great success doing that. But make sure you're doing your due diligence when you're selecting not only your time clock vendors, but your implementation partners as well.
Thanks, John. Project timeline.
Yeah, so On the project timeline, so this is the exact copy of the timeline that we use for the duration of the project. So we started in the middle of the year in July of 2022. So when I mentioned we were doing the business case, we originally started, we wanted to do this project in 2020. So it took 3 rounds of denials before we were able to get approval, or 2 rounds. We weren't successful with getting Workday Time pushed out until our 3rd attempt. So when you're making your business case, be prepared for that, but also be prepared to think outside the box. So when we wanted it to do it in 2020, we were told it's a great idea, not the right time, just because of all the COVID stuff happening. There was a lot of unknowns at the time, especially with our financials. We didn't know how we were going to perform, if we were going to, need to allocate funds somewhere else. Same thing happened in 2021. And, we were shut down just because COVID was still flaring up. In 2022, COVID was dying down, but we still wanted to make sure our financials were good. So we did a split year implementation where we did half of it in 2022 and then finished it in the first half of 2023. So that's a little bit unusual, but that got us across the finish line and enabled us to get this project in play. So we started out at the beginning of July of 2022, doing all of the planning. We did discovery and design. So we had representatives from all of our lines of businesses, from Winfield, from Purina, from dairy. All of those lines of businesses had a representative at the table to be able to make decisions and have a very good understanding of how their business operated, so that when the Helios team was sitting at the table with us, they could understand the complexities of each of the business, because they are separate businesses. They do pay a little bit different. That's fine. We wanted to make sure that we set them up for success. So we have, then it took, 3-4 months for the actual build process. Helios was very good. I was adamant that we didn't want Helios to build everything. It was a true partnership where they would build some, but the team here at Land O'Lakes would build some, so that we could be sustainable once the project was completed and Helios went on their merry way. So we had a couple of months of testing, we deployed, and then we went live in May of 2023. And then Helios stuck around for a couple of months afterwards to make sure that we were in a very good space during the hypercare. One of the things I'll point out too, you can see change management was around 9 months. It was a very big component of this. And Sarah Beth, I'll turn it over to you to talk about all the work that you did with change management, which really set this project up for success.
Yeah, what I really want to point out here is, like John said, we engaged people really early on the change management front. We went live in May, but we engaged that network back in November of the previous year. So we formed that network and brought them in and included them pretty much from the beginning. And I think we all would say that just the fact that we included them made them much more engaged. Change management is something that you really need to dedicate time to for a project like this. And sometimes it's a lot about people being heard, and you can really influence their mindset via that engagement and buy-in that you get from bringing them in. They will really care about being informed and feeling like they were part of it and part of a lot of the decisions. I'll do a little bit of a deeper dive on change management in just a bit, but just a call out there of, that extended timing that we took on change management.
And this is a very basic timeline, but what I would say is, if you're looking at, doing one of these projects and you're evaluating it, you need to make sure change management is included in this timeline, because it is that important. It is a major piece to the puzzle when we're deploying time tracking. Just real quickly on the clocks, you might see that the blueprinting lags a little bit. It's behind, and that's because we want to get through most of design overall from a project perspective before we bring in our time clock vendors, just because they're going to need to know specific details on what we've decided as far as how people are using those clocks and how we expect that to go. So the clocks themselves, that project timeline's a little bit more condensed, a little bit shorter. And we want to be mindful of using the implementation and resource time that we have with those vendors and make sure that we're very efficient with that. So that's why you see that kind of lagging a little bit. It's by design. So now we move directly into the implementation. And when we talk about those two bars that said design and configuration, I'm going to talk again about we always want to be thinking outside of the box. We do not want to lift and shift. We want to talk about desired outcomes versus what did you do before and how do we recreate that in Workday. Love to talk about what you were doing before in your previous system, but only as it relates to how do we make sure we get the right outcomes that we've decided that we need in Workday. And so that requires not thinking about lift and shift, but thinking about how do we need to be creative? How do we use everything off the shelf that we can? And how do we make creative workarounds where we need to directly in the system without making any kind of big customizations? We want to strive for simplification. John talked about that earlier. So that doesn't even necessarily mean that we're harmonizing the policy, but let's make sure when we're setting up the design that if we have 4 different flavors of shift premium, we want to make sure that we're setting up our technical design to make sure that we're efficient in the configuration and that it's going to be easy to maintain as you go on in time after you go live. 80-20 rule with a compliance twist. So yeah, we want to make sure that we're following that 80-20. So essentially saying, let's make sure that we get that 80% out of the way with the simplifications and the harmonizations so that we can focus on that 20%. But we've got this compliance twist where we've got specific states and in other projects, we may have, different countries that have very, very different compliance rules that we need to make sure that we account for in the configuration and the design. And then also the unions. So, one shoe does not fit all when we start talking about unions. And if we're talking about the US specifically, it definitely does not fit all when we're talking about California. And it doesn't fit all when we talk about the different groups. So for Land O'Lakes, that was plants versus office versus remote. If you're a retail customer, it's the retail locations versus office versus distribution centers versus remote, all those different things that come into play. When we talk about the configuration, just some basic rules that we followed on this project that we always follow is that we will do everything we possibly can to not create worker level eligibility. That goes along with trying to keep that dynamic, focus on Workday worker HR attributes that get built through all the other HR business processes. That allows us to eliminate the need to maintain data at the worker level as it relates to time tracking. Very important. When we configure Workday Time Tracking, we're always keeping the future in mind. So we're not necessarily, we need to get to day 1, but we need to think about day 1,000. And I know John has, later on, we'll talk about where Land O'Lakes is today, because they are further along. And what does that mean? And then configuration efficiency doesn't always equal the lowest object count. So we're not trying to build these crazy, awesome single point time calculations if they can't be maintained. So sometimes it means that we need to create a couple extra time calculations or calculated fields to make sure that it can be maintained in the future. We love to think that everybody on your team is going to stay forever, but people leave and new people take their place, and they need to be able to figure these things out and make it intuitive for them to be able to maintain and support these things. And then we're always ensuring constant knowledge transfer throughout the project. In this project, we had a great collaboration with John and his team. They were helping us build in the configuration. They were unit testing, offering playbacks as part of that change management. And they were constantly involved, and that really paid off. And then, just simple things. We need to agree on naming standards that make sense to your organization. So, think about that. Like, spend some time to think about that. Ditch the codes. We don't pay per character in Workday. We can make long-winded descriptions if we need to, and that really pays off down the road. Testing.
Yep. So testing obviously was a critical phase of the project. So for the most part, we had all of our timekeepers be testers for this because they're the ones that know their locations the best and their employees the best. So we created a very comprehensive testing list. Helios helped us create a lot of the testing scenarios, but we left that up to some of the timekeepers too, because they have weird situations that they come across every single day with employees punching in incorrectly or just how how their location pays their employees. So they were able to add scripts, and we encourage them to add new things. Just because you have this list of, 10 scenarios doesn't mean you just have to stick with those 10 scenarios. So we empowered those timekeepers. Go out there, try to break the system with what your employees are doing today. We want to make sure that when we go live, those employees are going to be paid correctly so that there's no surprises. You also want to make sure that you have the right people doing the testing. You don't want somebody there that's just going to check the box, that just does those 10 scenarios and calls it a day, for instance. So you want somebody that's inquisitive, curious, is willing to put in the work to be able to do this and do it accurately to have the best results. So we want to make sure that you have the right people, but they also have the leeway to get in there. And that helps them understand the system as well, so that when it goes live, they're kind of the experts on the system as well and can help guide the employees and managers of what they need to do to get those employees paid.
Change management.
Yes. So again, change management was huge for this project. As we mentioned earlier, we started this work early on in the project and we continued it throughout past go live. So here you can see some of the tactics that we used that Helios helped us to think through and to execute with our team. So we had a large change champion network. So that included at least one rep from each of our locations. So quite large. And that was to make sure there was at least one person at each site who could kind of speak for their site and also be a go-to for the employees at their site and to inform us along the way with their perspectives. Like John said, everyone kind of brought something different. So we had regular action items for them to complete with some built-in accountability through a dashboard that we created. We had like prize incentives for completion of those different tasks. So it would be things like passing along information that we would package up for them and putting up notices at the time clocks, just really making sure we were hitting every possible way to inform all the employees of what was coming, what they needed to do when it was time, and as we kept going. So it really helped to make that transition much more seamless. We checked in regularly with this group and we had a really high level of engagement on a dedicated team site that we created where they could get help with troubleshooting. They could ask questions, especially around go live. This was very active. Like John said, many of the change champions were also our testing group. So they were highly engaged. They couldn't wait to get their hands on the system, and just really helped again with that buy-in piece. I would also say this group had great questions along the way that we made sure to document. And then we rolled that into a very robust Q&A that's actually still live, still being updated as needed, and many people still utilize it, I know. And then we also had some personal touches that we made sure to include with our Change Champion group. So when we shipped out the new time clocks to each location, we included some fun cards and candy into these boxes and really tried to convey, this is an exciting change. This is an investment in our people. This is going to be an improvement. So I'd say all those things went a long way. And I think we'd all say overall, if this group wasn't well-informed and really felt like they had a voice, this whole effort would have been significantly more difficult to manage and roll out since we were doing this across so many locations. They were really key to success, and engaging them in the right way at the right time was really important.
Thanks, Sarah Beth. Yeah, I like to say you only get one chance at a first impression, and I think on this project it was really, really well executed. That the first impression was positive, and the change champions led that effort. And the only way to create those change champions is to go through this process, and it was really, really well done. And now we're at go live.
Yep. So we prepared quite extensively for go live and probably over prepared for this, but that's a good thing. So our pay period runs from midnight on Sunday to midnight on Saturday. But a lot of our locations don't work on Sundays. They just work Monday through Friday. But our big dairy plants run 24/7. So we wanted to make sure that we were prepared and gave them access to somebody that would be on standby 24/7. When they went live at midnight, we were ready for them if they had questions. And so we had an open call line that anybody could call in that was manned again 24/7 starting on midnight on that Sunday. So we had a Teams page created that we added everybody to, so that as people started coming in using the new system, if there were any questions, they could ask that and get an answer right away. We had a ton of different office hours that we set up for dedicated call time as well. We used that HR Solutions Center. We prepped them well in advance also. So those are some of the things we did from a support standpoint. We just wanted to make sure that all of our employees and managers had the support that they need, as well as our timekeepers, so that they knew that we had their back if they had questions or issues came up.
And poor John with that midnight shift that no one called into, but we were ready.
Yes, that was god awful. So I volunteered to take the midnight to 8 a.m. shift for the first 3 days. And the first time was great because, again, nobody ever once called from midnight to 8 over those first 3 days. But the first day wasn't a big deal. The second day I was dragging a little bit, and that third day was horrible. But hey, we got through it. So now that we've gone live, we've been live for a couple of years now. So one of the big things that we wanted, that we got feedback on, was from our animal nutrition group, our Purina facilities. So they didn't have the ability to do this before, but they wanted it now, where they wanted a flexible costing allocation. So we have people that run a bagger. They have people that run a palletizer machine. They have people that drive trucks, things like that. They wanted the ability to assign costing allocations to their whole plant all at once, because they had the same people doing the same jobs all the time. Even though they'd rotate through, they may spend 25% on a bagger. They may do 50% running a forklift. They may do, X amount of percent, but that percent was static, and they didn't have the ability to do that costing allocation on our old system, but they did in Workday. So we were able to make that change relatively soon after go live. And that was a huge benefit from them. From their financial standpoint, they were able to drill in and get a lot more better data on their labor costs than they were on the previous system. So that was a huge win. Workday released an update, I want to say that was a year ago, where we were able to auto submit time, which was a benefit. There were enhancements to the edit and approve time through one of the Workday releases as well that we took advantage of. We're looking at a new absence calendar experience this summer that we'll be putting in place. So that's one of the benefits about Workday and Workday Time, is it's always evolving and always getting better. So we have made some enhancements since we've gone live. We're not sitting on our laurels. We are looking at continuing to do things to enhance that employee and manager experience.
And John, you've done those enhancements on your own without a partner.
Yes, that's absolutely correct. Good call out. Yep. So on this one, I'm not going to go through everything, but a few things that I wanted to poke out. You can see there's a ton of project stats here. Again, not going to go through all of them, but one of the things I'll call out, when you're doing your RFPs, some of these numbers might seem inflated, like the 1,200 work schedule calendars. I had no idea that would be that much work and that high. The time calculations, Nick mentioned that a little bit earlier. There were some vendors when we were doing our RFPs that said, you're only going to need like 50. So here's Helios saying you need almost 200. We had a lot of discussions around that. I lean to him because I've never done this before, so I have no idea how many time calculations we needed. But if we would have gone with that other vendor that did 50, all we would have been doing is change request after change request. Once they really got into our system and into our company to really know, it would have blown up and it would have been a disaster. So making sure, we did keep a lot of stats on this, and this tells a great story. That chart at the top is from our HR Solutions Center, and that's the number of calls related to Workday time. So you can see there was a big spike at the very beginning, but it very, very quickly dropped off and normalized in a matter of just a couple of weeks. So that was a great success story too, that it became the normal way of doing things very, very quickly.
Another piece that jumps out, you might be surprised, the 130 time off plans. That's a direct result of the unions. So some of the CBAs had very specific requirements that require different time off plans. So anytime you're thinking about your own, scenario at your company, these numbers, some numbers may explode much higher and some might be much lower. And that's the important thing. And in John's case, he mentioned the 1,200 work schedule calendars. When we talk about groups with production facilities, this is a very common number. That's kind of what we were expecting. If you are a group that's mostly office workers and remote, you might have 5, right? If you're a large retailer and you've got thousands of locations, you might be using Workday scheduling. So then these work schedule calendars would go down, but then we'd have another component to the project. So a lot of different variables here, but it's just nice to see, what this looks like from what we experienced with Land O'Lakes.
And so finally, you can't not have fun if you work with Sarah Beth and I, because that's what we're all about. So it is a very complex, taxing project, but you need to intersperse some fun along the way. So I have a love-hate relationship with this screenshot, because now we're talking about having fun. I couldn't look like I'm having less fun in this screenshot, but what we did was instead of sending our executive sponsors a boring PowerPoint deck of how things are going, here's how we are, on budget, here are the questions that we have, we created an awesome news channel video where Sarah Beth and I are newscasters and we're presenting things, and we had multiple camera angles, and we went out to a reporter in the field to talk about the new time clocks. It was so much fun to do that, and we got great feedback. So make sure you have some fun on that. Sarah Beth can talk about the time-lapse video. There's a screenshot of that there for the time clock fun that we had.
Yeah. And for the record, that was the best screenshot of John.
Nice.
So
Not wrong.
the screenshot on the right there is, we did a time-lapse video. Part of this project, we took some of the burden off the locations by configuring them all at headquarters and shipping them out. So they were just plug and play, ready to go when they arrived. We had many sessions of clock configurations that we just had some fun with creating a video to share as well.
And just to clarify, because I know there was a question on this, that a lot of the locations used physical time clock devices, but we also had groups that were using the web clock in Workday, mobile punch. So you can mix and match the different variety depending on the type of worker that you are. We may not have clocks in specific areas, and we have other ways to track that. And now we're at the Q&A.
Thank you, John. Thanks, Sarah Beth and Nick. You must have done a great job, because there isn't any Q&As that I have out there, but I do have a couple questions that I have run into in the past that clients have asked me. And I guess, John, I'll give you this one. Did you guys create any specific reports or dashboards for individual groups? And if that answer is yes, how did you go about prioritizing or organizing instead of everybody coming to you at once?
That's a good question. We leveraged a lot of those change champions on there to figure out what they need to be able to do that. Workday has some delivered reports But we did create some, and we're still creating some. So we just had a request come in from our EH&S group, our environmental health and safety, to see how many employees are working over like 60 hours a week. We don't want to work our employees to death. So we want to really focus on our employees' well-being. And so they want some data on what locations regularly have employees working over 60 hours a week, and they want to address that. So we do still have one-offs coming in. One of the things that I want to continue to do is really work on dashboards for managers. We're taking a comprehensive approach for that, for all of HR, so that we don't have 75 different dashboards that managers can go into. But I do want to have a payroll dashboard that talks about, here's your historical overtime. The dashboards that a frontline manager is going to need is going to be different from a plant manager, is going to be different from those DOMs. So we want to create something that's cohesive but meaningful for all of those groups. So we did create some generic ones. There were some that wanted very specific data that we did not prioritize because they were able to get that through other means.
Thank you. Thank you, John. Question that came in here. Sarah Beth, you had mentioned that by moving to the Workday Time Tracking, that there were several manual processes that were eliminated or minimized, and you could quantify that. How did Land O'Lakes go about quantifying, and are there any specifics that you could share on that?
Yeah, and help me out, John, because the one that comes to mind is our large facility in California.
Yeah.
I know the timekeeper there quantified a time savings.
Yeah, we looked at, for the timekeepers, so for the managers, while we were going through the implementation, we worked with managers who were approving time to figure out what their pain points were and how long it was taking them to review time cards and to do all of the approvals and everything like that. Then we, I'm just going to make up a number. Let's just say that was 10 minutes a week. So we estimated that it would take, maybe 7 minutes a week on Workday time. So we validated that after the fact, after the dust settled and go live, because you're not going to be super efficient at it the first couple of times. So after the dust settled, we were able to do a comparison between, here's the time spent in e-time doing these tasks, here's the time now spent during Workday time. And so that was one of our measures of success, is did we deliver on some of those cost and time savings that we promised at the outset of the project?
Thank you. Question just came in. Do you have any employees that use both time clocks and the Workday app during work hours?
So
during the same shift, I should say, during the same shift.
So yes and no. I would say if you start clocking in on the time clock, you need to finish your day clocking out on the time clock. I don't believe, and Nick, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think you can mix and match those. But we do have different people, like in our plants, we have our production employees, they always use the clocks. But our front office employees in those same plants, they may or may not use the clocks. We let that up to the manager, but those employees have the ability to go in and use the desktop app or the mobile app to record their time. The production employees are locked down so that they can only use the clock to record their time.
Yeah, so we locked down the production. There are options to use both if you wanted to. Dormicaba is the only group that has state-aware clocks, so it knows whether you're checked in or out. We can essentially turn that off to make sure if you did have office workers who occasionally use the time clock but then go into the web clock. So we do have customers that do that. There are options, and we would talk through those from a pros and cons perspective.
Okay, thank you. I'm looking down at time here. We have about 1 minute here. Last one here, Nick, you might be able to help us out this. We have an in-house time clock system where employees check in and check out. Can that be transformed on Workday?
Yeah, so the answer is it depends. So if you have an in-house system where you already have an integration in place to send the time data to some other system or in place, we can certainly look at using that. Oftentimes with customers, we have things like if you have a lot of maybe you had a delivery fleet or a trucking fleet where they're tracking time for Department of Transportation reasons, and you want to use those punches, we can certainly bring those punches into Workday via API calls or integrations, things like that. Where sometimes that falls flat is we need to make sure that sometimes we might need a middleware to do that. That's where the certified time clock vendors really excel. So Dormakaba has the Beacom middleware that works seamlessly with Workday, and it's just a little bit cleaner. So the answer is it depends. We do see a lot of integrations from other time sources, and that's pretty common.
Okay. Thank you, Nick. We have several other questions. We will capture these questions and send them out to all of you that are attending today. I just wanted, as we're closing here, I want to close up with whether you're at the beginning of your journey or you're into the decision-making of moving to Workday. If you need help at any point in your process, creating an ROI, creating an executive readout, we at Helios provide workshops. They're a fixed fee, a minimal fixed fee workshop that can be used towards your deployment. But what we do is look at current state versus future state and create those readouts for you. So whether it's to take to a budget team, executive readout for an executive team, or to help you roadmap what this journey should look like, please reach out to us. We'll be able to help you out with that journey too. So I want to thank John, Sarah Beth, and Nick for presenting today. And most of all, thank you to all of you that were on the call today. The recording will be made available to you, as will the questions and the answers that we will compile and send out to the group. So with that, thank you very much for attending, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you.